Καλησπέρα, βρισκόμαστε στο Σταυρό του Νότου. Σήμερα έχουμε τη χαρά κοντά μας να έχουμε τον κιθαρίστα Greg Howe. Mr. Greg Howe, welcome to Greece. Thank you for the time for this interview.
Thanks for having me.
So, where did you first started playing the guitar? Let's start from that.
I started playing when I was about 10. Just, learned some chords. I had we had some neighbors that were teenagers, and they showed me open chords, and played like that for a couple of years, and just my brother and I would sing Beatles songs and songs that were popular back then. And then I had an older friend that was a teenager who one day bent a note in front of me, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. So I spent the next 6 months just, bending notes everywhere, and kind of discovered the pentatonic scale inadvertently. So I kind of just did that and got into copying Jimmy Page solos, and probably around the age of 14, 15, I discovered Van Halen, and then that was when I really got sort of infatuated with the guitar, and started getting into some of the two-handed stuff. And I took 3 lessons. I didn't learn anything because they were showing us silly little, melodies, things like that. And I wanted to rock out.
The way you described it, it's not the music that drove you to the instrument. It was your neighbors, and then you started listening to new music. Is that correct?
No, not really. We loved music ever since I can remember. Even when
Did you have a guitar in the house?
We had a guitar in the house, but we did. I'd make noise with it. I didn't really play it that well. And it was my father who said, "You should take lessons." I took 3 lessons. I didn't learn anything, and that's when some of these teenage kids would show me chords and things like that. So from there, I really sort of just evolved on my own and listened to a lot of different music. Got into Jimmy Page for a while, and learned a lot of Led Zeppelin tunes, and then that evolved eventually to Van Halen, and then when Yngwie came out, of course, I jumped all over that. But then at some point I got really interested in players like Pat Metheny and John Scofield and Scott Henderson and George Benson. So I was simultaneously listening to a lot of that stuff and listening to the energy and the sort of ripping stuff from rock players, but listening a lot to the harmony ideas that were happening with more of the jazz players. So it was really kind of a strange combination of influences. At least for all my guitar player friends thought so. Usually people were either into jazz or they were into rock. I was into everything. So I think that's sort of where my weird approach started to come from. Back then there was in the 70s when we were kids, there was a show called Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. And it was kind of like MTV, but they would have live concerts of, popular bands. And they had the Rolling Stones on a few times, and we loved that, because they were just, Mick Jagger was a great entertainer, and so we always wanted to do that. We wanted to be on stage. We wanted to be musicians. So ever since I can remember, we loved music, and we loved the idea of performing music.
Your first gig? At what age was it?
Well, there was talent shows that we did when I was 12 years old, 11 years old at school. But our first official gig was probably a party that we had right after we graduated from high school, and we had this huge party at my mom's house. Actually, there was tons of people there, and we had our repertoire of Van Halen and Ozzy Osbourne tunes that we did. So that was probably our first real gig, and then shortly after that we got into clubs and started playing in clubs, and got a good reputation, and did that for a while, all the way up until I got signed to Shrapnel Records.
How did that came up?
Well, we had actually developed ourselves enough to set up showcases for record labels. We were pretty big in our area. We were, and we were doing demos all the time and submitting demos to record labels, but nobody was signing us. And I just decided to send a tape to Mike Varney because he had a Spotlight column. He had a column called Spotlight in Guitar Player magazine. And it was really just out of desperation for something else. Hopefully somebody will discover us. And I didn't even expect to get selected to be selected at all. And so I was very surprised when he called me and said that not only was he going to feature me, but he wanted to sign me to his label. So that was...
You didn't have the consciousness that you had something at that point.
I didn't think...
You didn't have your own style. You didn't understand that.
Yeah, I didn't hear that, right. I just thought, you know, there's so many great guitar players out there. You know, I come from a very small town in New Jersey, so I just didn't think that anybody was going to think that I was that special.
When did you started to realize that you had something that was unique?
Well, I think after I got signed, you know, Mike Varney sort of pointed out what he thought was special about my playing, and it was still hard to recognize. It's always difficult to recognize your own strengths, you know. Sometimes you hear... Yeah, I tend to just hear what I'm not good at, you know. So
Which is?
Many things.
Any particular bad habits that you still struggle with? Do you have any?
Bad habits? I don't really practice. I mean, that's probably a bad habit. I've never really practiced. I play the guitar, but I've never had regimented schedules where I sit down and work on sweep picking, or work on alternate picking, or work on my left hand. I've never done that. I just jam. You know, I'll put on a backing track, or I'll turn the radio on and just play. And so I don't really have a lot of sort of specific technical things that I do. I do, but they're not
programmed.
They're not. Yeah, it's not formatted in a scholastic, academic sense. So maybe that's a bad habit. I don't think it is, because I like the results.
It's very inspirational as well, because
I think so.
A lot of teachers think that you should do something with a program, but when you hear someone like you playing the way you do and you don't have a regiment, that's very inspirational for some people.
Yeah, and I think anybody can be good, and it's. I often find it funny that people will go to school to learn how to sound like Jimi Hendrix, and Jimi Hendrix didn't go to school to play like that, you know. So I think that sometimes, you know, trusting in your own self and just making sure that you love it is really the best thing. It's probably the best strength for your development.
You were one of the first guitarists I know that started the online interactive lessons. What's your feedback from that?
I love it. It's great.
You still do it?
I do it when I can. I mean, it's hard to find the time to do it. And, you know, a lot of times I end up having to cancel because things come up. But I love doing it. It's just as beneficial to me as it is, hopefully, for them. Because I have, you know, most of my students are pretty advanced. So I have to be on top of my game if I'm going to, you know, have anything valuable to show them. But it's also great because I get to meet people from all over the world. And it's also great because the advanced students are usually inquiring about things that are much more deeper than just technique. You know, they already have technique, so now they want to understand the nuance of music, how to make somebody feel a certain way, why a certain chord change works nicely, you know, why this modulation instead of that modulation. Where does inspiration come from? And these are the types of subject matters that we get into a lot more. I mean, we, you know, of course there are students that we do licks with, but it's just, there's a new breed of guitar player out there. The internet has really helped to make a lot of people much more advanced a lot quicker. But the great thing about that is that a lot of the younger students, they get all this technique and then they go, okay, I have all this technique, but somehow it's still not.
I'm still missing something.
I'm still missing something.
Yeah.
So they're becoming more mature much sooner, much quicker, and I think that's great. So the process is great. It works out. It's just like a regular lesson, except that
you don't get to touch each other.
That's about it. That's really about it. You know, and it's in a certain ways it's better because they get their own equipment. They have their own comfortable environment. They have their own guitar,
and you do.
And I'm in my pajamas usually, so most of my students only know me as wearing pajamas.
So, now that you mentioned the internet, the internet community has developed an issue over the last few years about analog over digital or vintage gear versus modern gear and stuff like that. Where do you stand on that matter?
You know, it's honestly, I'm probably the one guy that you wouldn't want to ask about this, because it just doesn't matter to me at all. You know, to me, it's like whatever works for you is what you should do. I think that sometimes people get hung up more in the dogmatic, you know, picking sides, and so they read too many articles about analog is the greatest thing ever, so they just believe it, and then they argue in that case. They're not really always voicing an opinion based on experience. I don't have a preference. You know, I will say that analog has a quality to it that will enhance, or I don't even want to say enhance, but that will deliver something that's not exactly what you put down, and sometimes that can work to your advantage. But you know, digital is what it is. Digital is much more accurate. So when I've heard, there's a famous guitar player who I was reading an article on. I won't mention his name, but he said, I never record my guitar digitally ever, because it sounds like garbage. I only record analog. And I kind of feel like saying, well, if your guitar sounds like garbage digitally, then your guitar probably sounds like garbage, and you're using analog as an effect to make it sound better. So I think that's the problem. You know, for me, I don't really care either way. We just did a new record. The whole thing is digital. It sounds great. If your ears are cool, if you know how to get what you're looking for, then you can get it. Now, when we're talking about guitar amplifiers, that's something different, because there is a quality in the response from a tube amplifier that I think is still not quite there when it comes to the digital world. They're getting very close all the time, but
this is essential for you, though, the small difference.
It is essential. That is essential, because it's a nuance that feels like a deal breaker to me when it comes to being able to connect to it. So I'm really hoping they get it. You know, the Axe-Fx is a great unit, and I actually used it a lot on the new album, particularly for rhythms and some lead. But it's as great as it is, and it's the best one I've heard. You know, I'd be lying if I said it feels exactly like a tube amp. It doesn't quite feel that way to me.
Okay. So on the vintage and modern guitars,
it's the same thing. You know, I think it's a silly argument, because if somebody sounds great, if something works for you, then that is what's correct.
What do you think is the main reason this argument exists? Why do the sites make arguments about stuff that usually none of them have ever tried? I doubt if all of these people saying about vintage guitars have actually played with a vintage guitar.
I think you're absolutely right.
What do you think that creates this?
It's the same thing that creates, you know, if you talk to most people in the United States about which political party they're a part of, they usually have a side that they pick, and it's not based on anything other than what their parents say, or what they've heard, or what they've been told. So I mean, I just think that people have this need to be part of a category. They need to be part of a group. They need to be part of something. It's just a natural tendency for things, and I don't think it's a healthy one. You know, even with my music, I don't like categories. I don't like people saying, that's fusion, that's jazz, that's this, that's that.
But people need to label stuff like that.
People need to label stuff, and I think it's no different with this world.
Okay.
I think it's the same.
So after talking about vintage and modern stuff, now let's see what you have here with you.
Okay. This is the Laguna LE924 guitar that I was able to help design, and it's a very basic guitar, you know, typical sort of offset double cutaway Strat, you know, style with a humbucker. 24 frets, maple fretboard and neck.
You use low action, as I saw.
Yeah, action's pretty low. I don't pick a lot, so I need my left hand to, you know, especially after a long flight. Floyd Rose. This is a super switch. There's a 5-way switch with only 2 pickups. These are both humbuckers, but I'm able to get a lot of really cool, like, kind of spanky strat tones, particularly in the 2nd and 4th position. So it's kind of a fun. I don't like this 3rd pickup here because I tend to like bang into it. It just kind of intimidates me. So, and I also like, aesthetically, I like the look of just 2 pickups better. Okay. So, yeah, this particular one is Swamp Ash, but we've actually done some other versions in alder and mahogany and what else? Basswood.
Okay.
So, yeah.
This is your guitar, and where does it go?
Pardon?
Where does it go? Where did the cable goes then?
Well, right now, for this particular endeavor, it's plugged into a classic tube screamer. Actually, I'm going into this Buddy Guy wah pedal and then into the tube screamer. I love this pedal because apparently it's supposed to be the closest thing to true bypass that Dunlop has. But I also like the fact that it doesn't have an over amount of range, so it doesn't wah out too much. And
it's more subtle.
It's more subtle, yeah, and which I like. And that's really all I'm actually going into. These 2 T-Rex pedals are going into the effects loop, and this is just a reverb unit and a delay unit. They sound really, really nice. I'm bypassing everything else today just because sometimes when I come to Europe, I get a lot of noise. And if I don't absolutely need something, I won't plug it in. But yeah, so that's all we're doing today. And then we're obviously going into a JCM 2000 over there.
Which is close to what you use back home?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm working with an amp company called DV Mark, which is part of the Mark Bass company. And we're designing something. In fact, at the end of this month, I'm going to be there for a few days, hopefully honing in on an amp that's going to be called the Marigold amp.
Funny, yeah, you should mention Marigold.
Right. It's a good segue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to like a pretty organic sound. I don't have a lot of rack gear. I've never been into that. The few times I've tried to go there, I always end up unplugging everything and just plugging back into the amp, and it always sounds better. So I tend to keep it pretty stripped down. I have a Cornford MK50 that just sounds amazing with no pedals. It's one of the only amps that I own where I don't need to put anything in front of it except a cable. I have a lot of Marshalls. I have some old Fenders, but everything, there's nothing super high gain really. Everything is usually EL34s or 6L6s and 50 watts or 100 watts. And nothing real special about my rigs.
Yeah, you're special. That's enough. So, tell me about your near future plans.
Well, we want to take the band out on the road and tour as much and as often as possible. That's what we want to do.
Hopefully we'll see you here as well.
I would love to play here. Yeah, this is. I always love coming to Greece. So, and it would be fun to come with a high energy project. And I think people will really.
The album is out, or is it?
The album will be out somewhere between the 25th and the 30th of this month.
Okay, so we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to Greece. Have a nice seminar clinic.
Thank you
and
very much.
Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
That would be great. I'd love to. Thank you very much.
Για περισσότερες συνεντεύξεις και παρουσιάσεις εξοπλισμού, επισκεφτείτε το Guitarspot.Gr.